Good morning. Welcome to the Police 911 Fire Committee on June 21st, 2023. Present are Councilman Hockett and Councilman Sprinkle. Appointed officials, City Attorney Paul Jensen, Finance Officer Chandra Phillips, and Public Safety Director Justin Day. Also present are the Chief of Police, Mark Dvorak, and Andrea Potacek with 911. I will turn it over to the police department. The agenda looks to be 4 items. 911, there are 3, and Justin will be briefing us on fire department.
Okay, starting out with the police department, we're continuing to have some issues with our large copy machine. Office Product Center they came last week and took care of the issues. Hopefully, I foresee more issues happening with that copy machine, just because of its age. I've been told in the past it's kind of reached its end of its life expectancy. So, but we'll keep it working and as long as we can. And in the future, I'll be probably looking to replace this copy machine, probably with something not quite as expensive. We don't need, at this point, we don't need something as large or with the capabilities that this machine can be used for. Other departments in the law enforcement center do use it, but if we make a move, then we'll probably it'd be something we wouldn't need such capabilities for, or the production out of. So probably be looking for something quite a bit less expensive for that copy machine when it comes time to replace it. Patrol vehicles. Last year we were looking into getting a new patrol vehicle and replacing one of the older ones. This older vehicle, because we've been short-staffed, hasn't been driven nearly as much as it usually would have been, and here recently we've had some repairs done to it as far as suspension that will hopefully allow us to use it for at least to get through this year and next year. So save some money just by not having anyone on the force to drive it, or as many people to use it. So moving on from there, working on with law enforcement training, getting new officers assigned to law enforcement training class that starts in late August. We'll hopefully get 2, maybe 1 only, but hopefully we'll get 2, and then in November there'll be another class starting. Hopefully the other remaining 2 will be assigned to that class. So, and budget, like I said, copy machine will be worked into next budget most likely. No patrol vehicle I don't perceive will be needed next year on the next year's budget. Overall, this year's budget's looking pretty good. Only thing we've gone over that had any substantial amount budgeted for would be our uniform allowance, and that is just from the new hires, having to order uniforms and equipment for the new hires. So other than that, any more uniform expense we'll just take it off another line, budget line. But overall the budget is looking pretty good so far this year, and I'll be working more on preparing next year's budget for you guys. That's all I have. Any questions?
On Tuesday, Justin, you had the reports for the construction meeting that you guys had pulled. Do you have that number?
No, I don't.
Do you still have those?
I do up here. I think I ditched the paper.
Can you kind of run down what we've been doing for speed control efforts?
Yeah, I ran the report from June 1st to June 19th. There were 46.
Juneteenth?
Yes, till Juneteenth. And there were 46 contacts for Speed of those 31 were in the construction zone, and then the others were from around town. And then kind of as we talked about, that's kind of why we talk about, or you guys get the numbers that dispatch puts out. So from May 15th to June 14th, there were 647 calls for service for the police department. So, I mean, there was, you know, in that time frame, there's 5 days that weren't added in the 647, but that's kind of tells the rest of the story. If we're not on other stuff, then we are hammering traffic hard.
I know you'd said in one of your reports that speed control was going to become a high priority in winter.
Yep.
And I just wanted to report back to the council that we are, in fact, upping our speed control efforts. And I forgot what you'd said. I came in late to that meeting and I wanted to hear that. That those are valuable numbers. I think it's important to see what efforts the police department, when they say they're going to do something, report back on those. So I was really curious about those. Of the 31 contacts, did you have a breakdown on how they were handled?
Yes, 23 were warnings, and then 18 were citations for speed, and then the 5 for
Still
stop
community
sign.
policing, give
Yep.
them a chance to correct their behaviors going forward. Don't get me for a stop sign, tell them to forget. Okay. I know.
Not happening.
I'm getting double.
Unfortunately,
I know.
we truly live by the mantra, everyone treated the same, so,
How come I get twice as much hard?
well,
Yeah. Doubly accountable
you're doubly
for
accountable.
us.
yeah.
Us.
I realize that, yeah.
Those numbers, I think, are really, really important to the public. I'd like to continue to hear, as simple as we can, obviously, no details, but.
And to note to the public, when you see a citation in the paper, you'd think if it was a construction, it would say speeding in a construction. There's stipulations through the state where you have to have certain signage posted for that particular speeding violation to be enforced as
Right.
written as speeding in construction. So, and those signages aren't being used, not wanted at this time. So that's why it's just the regular speeding citation instead of speeding in the construction. If we find that speeding is gonna get worse, and then we'll work on getting those signs posted where the violations will be written as speeding in construction with the increased fine amount.
Right.
Because then the fines do double.
You've pulled some shifts out there also. I have. You have.
Yeah.
Not me officially. I've been riding along council, but Ron, you looked at me like, what are you in a patrol car for? Tough to judge traffic speed going through there. What looks to be over sometimes is not, and
Yeah,
it
you
gets
kind of
wild.
get lulled to sleep, as in if you're sitting there watching traffic for any amount of time, and most traffic is well below the speed limit going, usually around 20.
Yep.
Be honest with you, most of them are
yes.
under 20, right where the construction is, right in the center of town there. And then when you have a vehicle actually going the speed limit, or any vehicle with a large mass like a truck or a van or whatnot, then they really look like they're moving. And our radars,
They're speeders.
yeah, are calibrated every year. They were calibrated in November or October of last year. That'll be coming up here in another few months. And then every shift, the officer tests the radar to make sure they're accurate. So when we see a large vehicle go by and it looks like they're speeding and our radar says 25, they're actually doing 25. So it can be deceiving when you think something's speeding and it's not. And when we go back to, well, you could just move down the street back to the 30-mile-per-hour zone, and then you could really see the change in speed when it's actually only, a 5-mile-per-hour difference in the speed zones.
Has it slowed down through the construction zone as
Have they
far as
slo-
speeding?
For the most part, the speeds have decreased. As far as the amount over, have gone way down. So When we first started this construction project, speeds in the 25 mile per hour zone were, it wasn't rare to find someone going over 40, you know. Now that's knocked way down. Now we're getting to, 30 mile per hour, 31, 32. So, yeah, so the public's doing pretty good.
It's good to hear. The communication between the contractor, the state of South Dakota, and the police department and the law enforcement center has been getting better. I just wanted you guys, there's a real concerted effort to clean this up, and I would like you to thank your officers for their efforts with that. I'll shut up. Andrea, the floor is yours. You can talk about your 647 calls in winter and break them down if you'd
Yeah.
like to.
So just looking at our current budget here, our equipment line, I know we talked about this in previous meetings and made everybody aware that that was going to be a thing, but since it's officially on there now, the equipment line is quite a ways over just because we had an immediate need to replace the camera computers. So the line below it where we had budgeted for CAD computers this year, we just bought the camera computers instead of. So it went in the equipment line because it wasn't technically the CAD computers. So that one looks like it's way over, but just came from somewhere else, so.
I look at your bottom line, you're sitting at 39.86% of expenses. We're 46.9% of the way through the year, so you're trending below. That's just something you'll want to keep an eye on.
Yes.
Where you take it from for immediate needs, I get it, totally get it.
Yeah, yep, that one caught us off guard, so we were just fortunate that we had it there to be able to take care of it. Looking at 2024's budget, I know I talked about last time, still just reaching out to our vendors and stuff to get numbers put together. So far, things are kind of looking like there's not going to be a lot of increase. As far as the money that we pay the state for our teletype, that stuff, they're not increasing. Our 911 mapping software is like a $300 increase, I think, was all, $350 maybe. Yeah. Still waiting to hear back from PowerPhone. That was what I talked about last time, getting the numbers put together in terms of how many people we have to recertify and what that would look like versus doing the continuing education program that we're hoping to get. So as soon as I get that, then I'll bring those numbers with. One of the things that got brought up, I think it was even last year, but it was too late for the 2023 budget, was an on-call policy for the law enforcement center.
The weather inclement on-call?
No, just on-call in general. Now, speaking only for my own department, we have 2 lieutenants on currently, and there's kind of some confusion as far as who we're supposed to be, if somebody's sick, are we letting Andrea know? Are we letting AJ know? Are we calling Kelsey? And to just kind of lay it out, if something goes wrong, you're the person that they're looking for this week.
I don't think that's a policy. I think that's an SOP in your department. I think the police department probably went through some of these communication challenges.
What she's bringing up is a discussion for an on-call, like other departments, if there needs to be an on-call pay somewhere involved in that, is where this discussion is, because that's.
We had that conversation with the lieutenants, and that was one of the questions that got brought up, is, if we set a sort of on-call calendar, is there going to be on-call pay like we have for water, sewer, and electric? I looked at the policy and told them that at this point, it specifies that it is for those departments, but I told them that I would bring it up and ask the question. again, only my own department and conversations that we've had have been brief about it because we're just now getting to the point where we have multiple people in leadership roles. We're looking at like 2 weeks at a time on the on-call schedule. Obviously, I am on call all the time. You know, if they need me, they can always call me. But for those two, moving forward, having a set on-call type calendar, whether that would be something they would be compensated for, just the on-call time or not.
In your lieutenants, and it doesn't matter, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just running this through my head. They are hourly in the police department, they are in corrections, and you are also. They are not our salaried employees, and that's.
Correct.
Okay. I had not heard this discussion. I must have missed this meeting.
I was
or-
not even in attendance myself. I think it was an HR training that we had, like it was when Deb was still here. I wasn't there for it.
Okay.
It was just something that got brought back to me that this happened during, you know, I always got briefed afterwards.
Sure.
So I wasn't even in attendance for the majority of the actual discussion itself.
My reaction is only because this is the first time I heard this, and this has to be a consideration that council would do as far as a policy. So you're bringing it to the right place.
And that's why it was brought up here, because we know this will be a council thing, but also as part of the budget, just so if you guys see that, that's why we're gonna have the conversation here, and then as it goes on, see where everybody sits on it for the 2024 budget.
I'm just running numbers through my head right now.
I think the last time it was brought up is when we were actually discussing, I believe it came up when we were discussing union at that point in time, because water and electric are covered underneath of that. It has been over a year. At that time, that committee said, we're only looking at water and sewer, until it's officially brought up by department heads on the other side. That was
What
where it was
committee?
left. I feel like it was one that we sat down, I don't know if it was personnel or if it was one of Paul's committees. It was in Paul's office, that's what I remember.
Yeah, I was thinking it was maybe in personnel committee, but it's been a while.
Yeah, so it got brought up, like you said, Deb was in there, it got brought up. I don't know if it was,
It was kind of one
I
of
don't
those
know
things
who it
where
got
it
brought
was
up by.
on it was on the agenda sheet that we get, but it was, you know, kind of one of those where Public Works went before us and it was, we can skip this one because that, and I think there was a small amount of discussion and it was kind of finalized at, we're too late, budget's been set for 23. And like you said, if the department heads wanted to bring it up, I wasn't there, so I'd kind of forgotten about it until we started having conversations about how we were going to handle an on-call type situation in our department.
Can you
That really
clarify for
Sounds
me
more like the HR training.
what's specified by on-call? What are you talking about? If somebody in your department is on-call, does that impede their life in any way? Can they go to the river fishing? Can they run the pier on a shopping trip? Can they
No.
leave town? If they're on-call, are they expected to respond in a timely manner within so long if you call them? How does that work? Walk me through that.
Well, for example, here in the last month, when we had the power outage type situation at the law enforcement center, I was the one that got called. And at that point, someone needed to be there immediately. And that's what happened. So in situations like that where we have equipment that stops working, somebody needs to be there right now to go address the issue. We've had instances where things are busy in the dispatch center. We are paging multiple agencies, whether it be just in Tripp County or all of the counties that we dispatch for, and one of our repeaters will get stuck. And so it will sit there and it will just squeal in the dispatch center, and someone has to go down to the tech room to reset it. That's not a situation where someone can leave dispatch and go do that because it's too busy in there, otherwise they would. So they call someone, usually me, and I go down and reset that repeater. So it's just situations like that where somebody needs to go down now and take care of an equipment-related issue. So yeah, I mean, we do have to have people that are around. Now, when it was just Deb and I there, we always made sure that if we were both going to be out of town, that one of us was close enough to be there in a reasonable amount of time.
Andrea, in the examples that you've given, does that fall under what I'm understanding to be managed IT? Where if we sign the managed IT contract, which is in this budget, that would fall within those parameters?
I would think so, but some of the conversations that I've been part of regarding managed IT lead me to believe no.
I think it depends on how you write your contract and then how much you're willing to pay each month too.
Yeah, some of the conversations, like those types of things, no, not.
You have $27,150 in your budget for managed IT. That contract wouldn't managed IT break fix at that point. I don't even know that that's break fix. The wheel sounds like break fix, but when the computers go down, that would fall under those parameters. I'm just curious, are there other examples of the on-call where your LT has to not go to the river to go fishing and needs to stay in winter, that we would need them to be here in winter? And they can't be, I think our on-call policy says within 10 minutes of the city at all times when they're on call.
Yeah, I was an EMT for a while, my earlier days, and then when you're on call, I mean, it impeded your life. You couldn't do what you wanted to do, so it's only just to be compensated for that inability
Correct.
to go about your daily life, because you had to respond at a moment's notice. You had to be by your phone, and back then we didn't have these. We had a phone in the house. So I'm trying to, the example you gave, could an officer right there by you, could you say run down and fix that break, or could they do that in the course of their duties also? Could, working together on that maybe? I'm just looking at it,
As long as they aren't one of the people that's running around responding at that point in time.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Exactly, I understand that.
The other situations, we've started working on putting together dispatch procedures in the event of an active shooter situation. And one of the things in those procedures is to call a lieutenant, so that we have additional staff in the room, just so that we're rotating staff out and not just relying on the two people that we have in the room. During the weather situations, there were a lot of times where we had a third person in the room to handle the call volume. When we had the most recent one that I can think of was the tornado that hit Burke. We had to have a third person in the room during that. Those types of situations, few and far between, thank goodness.
Yeah, but you never know.
You never know. You never know if and when the situation might come up. There's going to be times that we're going to get called just for a quick question. We get those texts and calls all the time, and those things happen. They take a couple of minutes and you've handled the situation. The things where we actually have to be there, when that comes up, it's something where you have to be there now. But yeah, it's a few and far between situation, thankfully. It's just something that we are going to have to look into addressing.
When it happens, we have to respond. We have to have the ability to respond when that situation happens. I understand that, yeah. The urgency of the matter.
Can I ask the question? There's a couple different ways you could look at this. You could look at this as a set weekly rate, which is what we do for water and electric, or would you be looking at something more similar to what like hospitals do? And ultimately, yes, you're on call during this week, but what happens is if you get called in, then you get so much additional on top of your hourly rate. Because like you said, the most recent one you could think of was the Burke tornado that was
That was
2 years ago.
The most
So-
recent tornado situation, yeah, I mean, obviously, the winter storm thing
Yeah.
being the most recent,
Yeah,
but
so, I mean, if we're talking, would that make more fiscal sense rather than paying a weekly thing if it's something that happens once every year? Maybe paying extra additional on top of their wages if they get called in type of deal. I don't know, that is an option, I know hospitals do that.
Instead of on-call, more of a call-in
Yes.
supplement.
Paid for your time. If you're called in, you're paid for your time. If you're not called in,
Right.
you're not.
It's called PRN.
How do they, because I guess I'm not familiar with that, so how do they assure that the people who are on call during that time can respond in that manner?
So, they're still on call, they're PRN at that point in time, and it's just, here's your guarantee, you're the one who's going to be called this week, guaranteed that if you get called any phone call, period, you're gonna get an additional 71 cents on top of what your normal pay is. I don't know why 71 sticks in my head, but that's what sticks in my head.
Yeah, just whatever it is.
Yep, and so there is a compensation on their hourly rate. They know that if they respond, they're gonna have that compensation on their hourly rate.
But with
If they
PRN
don't respond, then they don't get that.
With PRN, it's open to any of the employees that still are in the town. There's not one specific that has been set aside and said you have to be within 10 minutes of winter. It's open to anybody that's off duty that comes in PRN.
We had it set to specific employees.
That's on call, in my
And I just look
opinion.
at, when I was at, slinging parts, we had something very similar, because every guy took the phone every week, and you got, I think it was $100 to carry the phone.
Yeah.
And you had to answer it when
Yeah.
it rang, and then if you went in, then they gave us the after-hours fee as well for going in, so you got your 100, and then whatever it was.
Mr. Dvorak, how do you handle special fires within the police department? If something goes down on a day shift, not enough people, something bigger happens, how do you respond to that emergent situation now?
So if a lieutenant isn't working at the time, say it's during day shift, we have a day lieutenant and a night lieutenant. If the emergency happens during the day shift, then that day shift lieutenant is called. If the day shift lieutenant isn't available, going out of town, he'll coordinate with myself and the other lieutenant, okay, I'm gonna be out of town, and with the other officers' knowledge as well, okay, I'm gonna be out of town, so it's just communication, and you'll need to call either myself or the other lieutenant.
So you have backup for that situation, you're set up
Yeah,
for it.
we just
Are
communicate.
they
each other.
compensated extra for that?
No,
Okay.
just your hourly rate if you
Yes,
come.
yep, if you come in, yep.
Because that had been talked about down there too, those guys we had kind of visited with them last year as well.
Also, Chief, in the event of a situation, a crisis situation like we're identifying, the commissioner's been called also and has responded also, correctly?
Yep.
Yeah.
You've came out a lot, quite often.
Yeah.
So there's 3, 4, that's built in. Okay.
Okay.
Interesting. I mean, I really wanted to hear this. I just never had heard it before. I also see you have inclement weather listed with that, and that's something that we'd started. I did know about inclement weather last year and what we were talking about in that scenario. Why don't you go ahead and bring that up also, Andrea?
yeah, I just wanted to touch base back on that because we talked about it a little bit after we had the major incidents over the winter, in terms of, originally when I brought it to the table, it was a situation where I was looking for a way for the employees, because we have the policy that says that if the inclement weather is being predicted, it's the expectation that you will be inside city limits so that someone from the police department or public works can come and get you and bring you to work.
Very good.
We had some situations where that didn't happen. and there were employees who couldn't get to work because they weren't in town like they were supposed to be. And so when that happens, other staff has to pick up that slack.
Yes.
And so the question that I brought up originally was, is there some sort of punitive action that can be taken where we require that employee to cover extra hours for the employee that had to cover for them, or things like that? As discussions were had, we started leaning more towards maybe a benefit for the employees that did cover the extra
Right.
instead of going the other direction. So I just,
And correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner, but we had this issue in all three of the divisions at the law enforcement center. And that's something that we didn't get that.
We did get it accomplished.
We did.
It's a policy on
Oh,
every
yes.
job description that if they are not here, then they're subject to disciplinary action.
That's right.
Not excluding termination. Which I know we don't want to terminate by any means, that's not the goal, but I mean, if it's a continuous situation, that is a possibility.
Yeah.
So we actually wrote that into every job
Job
description
description.
throughout the city of Winter.
'Cause
So
I
now
think
every employee has to be
When
here.
that got brought up too, then it was looked at what some of the other cities around the state are doing. They figure out X amount of emergency days, like if the mayor calls an emergency, a weather-related emergency, then this kicks in, and then everybody who does have to come in to work, you know, got an extra 50 cents or an extra dollar, or it was looked at possibly just a one-time thing for working that day or whatever. There was a lot of different
That's
things that were discussed, but nothing was ever kind of ironed out until we're getting to this point.
Instead
now.
of the punitive, we never ironed out, okay, if we do declare a weather alert in the
Yeah.
city of Winter, the expectation is you'll be within the city limits, able to report to duty. Those that report that weren't on the schedule, even, you're saying an additional emergent alerts stipends for coming in and being available.
I think you brought
Kind
that
of.
up, Chandra, didn't you? Like what
it
Sioux
was Sioux
Falls did?
Falls. Wasn't it Sioux Falls that?
So Sioux Falls is on their street side that I had heard about, where they budget so much snow events per year. As far as how much how much that entails, I don't know. I know the fuel and equipment costs were definitely built in there because they also contract out to get some of their streets done. As far as public safety, I never heard anything on public safety side. That was just the streets, public works side. It's definitely something that any of this is able to be looked into, hard to budget for. I mean, as you guys know, 8 years ago when we did personal services, and again, all of this would be taxable, retirement, everything through personal services. If you add on call pay, anything like that, it actually creates a whole new code and a new rate of pay for everyone, for overtime. But there's ways to do it, just not sure how we budget for it, because right now, I think 2019 was the first time we went to, we're not rounding up anymore in personal services. I round up to the nearest dollar is what I do. If it's 251.13, it's 252, so it's an even number. Used to be we rounded up to the nearest thousandth and then added another 1,000 or more on there. So in order to budget for it, it's a little bit harder. I don't know, if you guys want us to be able to do additional in there, I don't know.
The
It's
budgeting can be
just figuring that
handled.
out.
At this point, I just wanted briefed, and now the discussion really becomes between your departments and council to come up with a policy to work this out. I appreciate, I mean, inclement weather was aware of, didn't realize we had finished that. You're looking for the reward measure for those that report. Not opposed to that, for people being available. I've been out there during some of these snowstorms and all hands on deck, and it gets crazy.
One of the things we were caught up on that was who declares the emergency. Because it's very easy for Public Works to say it's an emergency for their department and very easy for Public Safety to say it's an emergency for their department. And yet, we could have mayor do it too, but then were some potential ramifications from a mayor calling it too.
Correct.
In the current world of what we have in the city of Winter, where our mayor is not a full-time employed mayor type of deal. So,
I will say this, one entity needs to make that call, whoever it is, one entity needs to, so everybody's on the same page, everybody knows when that situation happens, and one entity makes the call.
And I'm not gonna speak,
And
I-
it should, right?
I think it should be the mayor. And
I
I'm
do
not
too,
saying
right
because
there.
it's me,
No.
I'm saying
No.
whoever the mayor is for the
Yes.
city of Winter has to make that decision based on the input from the commissioner and the public works director. Because at that point, he's authorizing the expenditure of emergent funds, inclement weather funds. Whether it's me or previous mayors or future mayors, I think that falls within their realm of
I
responsibilities.
think, if I remember correctly, Paul, when you researched it, that was where the concern came up, is mayors can't authorize expenditures?
Correct.
But he can authorize
He can-
the emergency alert,
Yes,
which
he
they
can.
have budgeted in the expenditures.
Yes, you can make that decision, I
Okay.
think.
But that was the basis for the concern, was wanting the people that are making the decision to be people that are responsible for their budgets.
I would see, and I am going to speak from my own experiences with the Public Works Director and the Commissioner, I've always been briefed on them on what they believe is coming. We have only maybe declared in 8 years, last 5 years, maybe a handful of emergent weather situations. And I think whether it's me, past or future, I think that's the conversations with their appointed officers who will be dealing with that in their budgets. And it's not even their budgets, it's their department budgets underneath, but it becomes a concern of what's in the best interest of the residents of the city of Winter, and you're trusting your appointed officers. They need a sounding board, and between the three will come to a decision ultimately, that mayor. I'm saying we're not gonna have any weather this winter. Future
That-
mayors will make that decision.
That exact
And-
scenario worked well with the school district. We had our superintendent, head CEO for the school district. He would call, in cases of inclement weather, he would call Doug Franz up north, Tripp County. He would call Eldon Williams down south. They would get their heads together. They would assess the situations out there, and then they'd make that decision, and the superintendent would put the announcement on, and it worked fine. We could do the same thing in the city. Jody could consult our people, get a consensus of what we should do, makes a call, goes on the radio, everybody's on the same page.
And I will just tell you from this last event, Joe, that's exactly what happened. Troy and I were talking every day, Jody and I were talking every day. I would say I'm safe to assume that Jody and Troy were talking every day. And it was kind of a collaborative
Yes, and that's.
situation,
that's the
because
way
then
mine
Jody
went.
saw it from our side, this is what we're seeing. Jody saw from Troy's side, this is what those guys are seeing. Troy and I were back and forth all the time, especially when it was right in the midst of it, when we're getting ambulance calls. You know, we had to park 2 blocks away, and then we'd hike in, and then
Yep.
we'd call the boys, and they'd come with the loaders, and then by that point, when we're getting them out of the house, the ambulance could get close. So, I mean, this wouldn't have worked if it was not a collaborative effort
No.
on everybody's part.
So now we're adding a new element. Obviously, resources, fuel costs, personal wages, but now we're also looking at whether it's on-call, inclement weather, PRN, we're adding a new facet to this if you guys move forward with a policy that financially impacts the city of Winter even more.
And would you do it for just public safety, or would you put it on for public works who come in too? If there's an emergency, I mean, even my
What do they do
departments.
now that this
That's a good
Public
question.
Works have?
Public
How-
Works just gets
how does
their hourly
Kelly run
wage
it?
and
What does it
overtime.
do? They
Streets
get-
does not get paid on-call, period.
They don't, okay.
They just know that if there's inclement weather, they are expected to be there.
And when they come in, they're paid for that,
Yep.
compensated,
And
okay.
just so everybody knows, 1 and 2 are 2 separate issues.
Sure they are.
There are times when they can overlap, but the on-call is different than the inclement weather.
It is.
And so that's kind of where, like, the inclement weather thing, this is why there was a lot of options there, and we're open to a lot more with, I mean, we want to get people's ideas in this, but it was, the inclement weather thing was more, okay, when we have these events, because it will affect the street guys if it's, basically, if there's any emergency, I can't really think of much other than maybe like a active shooting situation where the parks guys and the street guys aren't gonna get involved. If we have a tornado and an emergency gets called, those guys are gonna be out moving trees.
Yes.
The electric guys are gonna be out doing power lines. We're gonna be out running traffic, trying to pull people out of stuff. So I mean, like, if it's a snow event, obviously, we're needing them to cut paths. We're out in it, so I really don't see how this, and there could be that I'm just this, that I'm not thinking about, but I don't see how this doesn't affect them as well. So if it becomes a thing to where if that emergency gets called during that duration, I know the couple things that were discussed is, one, it's like a X amount of dollars for that day. The other thing that was talked about is if it's an emergency call during that emergency, there's an extra $1 or an extra $2 added on to everyone's pay. There's so many different things that could happen here, depending on where you guys as council want to go with it.
Andrea, if they were told to come in and have to be within city limits and that, and they don't show up, are they reprimanded or anything?
An on-call person?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Even not
I
on
would
call.
think it would
With the
be at this
inclement
point.
weather policy, the way they have it, they can be at this point in time.
That's what I mean.
But specifically on-call, if there's an on-call water person and there's a water break and they don't respond, report, yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's actually a major.
Should be, yeah, it should be. a
Because
major item.
especially, and I shouldn't say
'Cause
that
they're
there's a
ignoring
difference
their
between
duties.
them, but if there's a fire and electric doesn't show up before the fire department gets in there, then they're actually putting other lives at risk at that
Right.
point in time. So if they don't show up and they don't show up sober, then there's a whole different ramification.
You
that
have to
comes along,
explain
'cause
to
both
me-
of those come through.
I have a real, just this question, I have a question. On-call for those departments is when there's nobody in the department working at all. And there is an emergency, a water break, a power line goes down, but nobody is on duty. It's an on-call person where we've said 24/7, rotating shifts, we've always got somebody on call. How is on-call appropriate in that scenario? Because there's always somebody there versus the Public Works Department, where the electrical and water department at 5 o'clock, they go home. A water break at 2 o'clock in the morning goes to the on-call person. That is the very definition of on-call. So, and you don't have to answer now, Andrew. I mean, this is just something that strikes me right now. That facility, we've staffed 2 people every shift, schedule-wise. That's what we've appropriated for right now, and in the police department. And in corrections, we have different set amounts of people that are on every shift, where there's always somebody on duty available at that time.
And the biggest difference that comes to mind right away is when we're going back to number 1 on the on-call discussion, you're talking that simply for leadership. Because that is for those times when phone calls are having to be made. You know, kind of like when the officers especially, if we have some of our newer guys that have questions, that want to ask something, because it's a constant on the job. You're learning stuff every
So
day.
in the corrections department, we have the leadership established, the corporals, the sergeants,
Yep.
the lieutenants. chain of command is there, there's always leadership there.
100%. Whereas
And-
here, it's,
The numbers
Yep.
don't justify the depth, maybe. Maybe we do need. Originally, if you remember, I put together with you and asked you to implement a schedule that the lieutenants and the officers rotated in pods of threes. And the lieutenants were scheduled in the field for 32 hours. There was 8 hours of flex that covered that. Does the new schedule cover that, or are they just working 40-hour shifts now, and that's been taken away?
If we're full staff and we had a third lieutenant, that third lieutenant would have that flex time for about
8 hours?
half of his hours. Where he
Half
could-
of his
Yeah,
hours,
where you could move to different shifts wherever it's required.
which would be kind of an on-call if we had the 3 lieutenants and we were full.
Yeah, kind of like a on standby instead of on call. I guess you can call it something like that.
Okay.
But
Is that still the plan in the PSAP department?
To-
Eventually, I'm not saying.
To eventually end up with a third lieutenant?
Yeah.
Yes.
And same type of rotating schedule, have you looked at that schedule of the police departments to see how they're, and would it be similar? No comment? All right. I mean, your department's different, all right. I'm just asking. I have, these are questions that are popping into my mind.
On the inclement weather, I mean, I'm here, right now, we put it in, all staff are required to be here in inclement weather. If
Yeah,
you
from,
were-
from the finance department
Correct, so if you
around.
were to do an additional pay in an emergency situation, would you still want that for every employee? I.e. finance, code enforcement as a code enforcement officer, filing clerk at the corrections 24/7, your recycle guys. Would you still want to pay them additional to be at work? Or would that be administrative leave at their regular rate of pay?
This goes back to the conversation that we were having. If the mayor, with discussion, makes that call, what departments are expected in an emergent situation to respond? Obviously, PSAP, you're gonna be receiving all the calls. Police department, you're rolling out in the mix of it, along with your public works, your water, your sewer, your streets, your parks. Finance office, we've asked that they be there.
Just, it depends on the,
What do
on the
you do now?
week, it depends on the day, it depends on how many, like, for this year, this is the most administrative leave days I've ever given out since I've been here for 7 years. We had 3 administrative leave days in a row.
It's
Had that been a
Tuesday.
payroll week, could have been an issue. Because employees still want paid, doesn't matter if it's blizzarding out. Had it been a billing, mail wasn't going, so it wouldn't have really mattered either way, so wouldn't have been the end of the world. But, so it just depends on the job, depends on the week. Had it been a council meeting week and we needed to have claims out, could have needed to have that person here. So, but if it's a random Wednesday, Thursday, I don't know that they need to be included in that emergency call-in pay.
Well, and remember,
And
there's two,
same, I don't know code enforcement enough to know.
there's kind of 2 tiers on this whole thing too, as far as when you're talking the inclement weather thing and who's available. Because the first tier is really just a requirement that says, under your job description, you have to be within the city of Winter. Where we can come get you if we have to, but you don't have to report to work, but you need to be within the city of Winter. That's tier 1, and then tier 2 is, okay, we need your hand to be one of those that's on deck, on the job.
So if the department head calls you in.
Yes.
Then you would get that emergency pay. That's what
Correct.
we're looking for.
Correct.
Okay. I'm just trying to think of this from a budgeting standpoint of, I mean, how would I plug that into my numbers?
Right.
Theirs makes more sense. Again, I don't know, do you need the filing clerk down at the jail? Is your 24/7 facility actually going to be open? If the roads are closed, I would assume 24/7 is not actually open. So then do you need to call them in and pay them emergency pay? That's where my questions are coming from. And it's not just from the finance office, yes, I work with that budget, but also on theirs. I don't know that Mark has anyone, or Andrea has anyone right now, but corrections has a couple.
So we started this discussion yesterday, and you guys need to hear this. The general fund has the contingency, which is 5%. We've always made it 5% of the entire budget. It should be 5% of the general funds, correct? Each of the enterprises, which is corrections, water, sewer, electrical, they're enterprises. They can have, and sanitation, they can have 5% contingencies. The argument was made, the specialty funds don't have a contingency.
That excludes you, sorry.
But this is the very nature of a contingency where maybe that's a transfer in to cover those wages. That's how you budget that, is in a contingency.
But then you have to have council permission, and Paul and I both know, we went and asked for contingency because of the 7.25 versus a 3.25, and we were told, we'll see if you can just make it work. We're not gonna give you contingency. Well, the rest of my budget numbers
They will
were
at the end of-
budgeted pretty tight too.
I think they would, I think council's willing to spend the contingency, but.
But how
when
does
we're
that
do-
work if
when
I
we're
don't
doing
have
it-
the ability to spend it?
When we're doing that in January and February, and there's 10 more months to go, that's been the biggest discussion that I've heard.
So what
Do-
if our
do-
emergency happens in February and I say, oh yeah, you need to come in, and then council says, well, I don't think they needed to come in, so no, you can't have contingency.
That's a good point. Again, there, the mayor's authorizing it, council has to transfer the funds, and they may choose not
That's
to.
right.
Correct.
Mayor made a bad call. Got 1/2 inch of snow and called everybody in. We're not gonna.
You're not-
Mr. Jensen and I talk about checks and balances in this entire
Yes.
structure all the
Yes.
time. That would be the checks and the balance. The mayor makes the call with the public works director and the commissioner, and then we get a 1/4 inch of snow and they say, you idiot, we're not gonna allow you to do that. We're not transferring because
Or
that's.
you've eaten all of your contingency up because bids came in high, and then the storm happens in November, and you have no contingency.
That's why council has not transferred anything yet. I think they're waiting to see how this rolls out. And now we have contingencies that we will be developing in the budget. I'm just saying for future budgets, you build those into those enterprise departments. And I would say now that we have an argument to put a contingency in a PSAP.
They're a specialty fund.
I know. We've argued with the auditors before.
That's a state law, not a auditor's opinion.
Well, I guess I can argue with senators and representatives just the same. I have an issue that would apply. A case study. Anyhow, we've got 5
To me, an
minutes.
emergent situation is happening. There should be no misunderstanding or no missed calls. You would not make that call based on a weather forecast. You would not call Justin and say, oh, Justin, I watched the news tonight. Oh, man, we might get pounded tomorrow with the blizzard. Oh, boy, they're talking 1.5 feet of snow, whatever. No, that's not what I have in mind. It's based on a weather forecast. You make them calls during an emergent situation as it's happening, boots on the ground, we know what's going on, then you make that call. What's wrong with that?
The only comment I would make is that, go back to my point that I was making with Chandra about the 2-tiered calling
Yes,
situation.
yes.
That one that says something's looking really possible or probable here, we need to be available.
Yes,
There's that first level. You're doing that based on
we
your
have that
forecast.
now.
You're doing that based
We're
on your
doing that now,
forecast.
basically.
Yep.
Yeah.
With your department, your,
Because I
Right.
really like the way you
Department.
put that, Paul, with the multi-level, because the forecast dictates
The inclement
emails
weather.
that go out.
Yes.
Because obviously, we get National Weather Service emails that come into dispatch. Once that comes into dispatch, it goes out, and then every department head says, all right, guys, here it is, stay close. If you're scheduled, stay close. Leadership, be ready if we need you. And then If it doesn't come, great, fine, wonderful, but if it does, then we've always gotten to that level too.
Right.
To where it's, all right, all hands on deck, let's go. And
there's
we
also-
saw that when, I mean, not even, because the fire department was involved in that one, right? It wasn't a weather event, I know that's kind of what we're talking about, but when we had a missing elderly gentleman who was suffering from medical conditions, like, we brought the house in, because we've got a guy that we cannot find, and it's getting cold out. So we had every officer show up, the whole fire department was out there. I mean, like, that was an emergent situation. This wouldn't apply to that, but I'm just saying.
I would consider that an emergent
When-
situation.
when stuff
It would be,
happens-
Yes, I consider that.
When stuff happens, I will be completely honest with you, we don't have time to worry about, you know, well, what's the policy here or something like that. We have something that we have to address, and we have to address
Yes.
immediately. And nobody is worried about how are we gonna get paid on this, because it has to be,
Yes.
its lives are at stake at
To
this
me, it's
point.
part of the job.
Yeah, it
Make
is.
that call.
Part of the community, we talk all the
Part of
time
public
about
safety.
no one life is more valuable than another, and every life is valuable. We talk about that all the
Without question.
time. That situation, to me, is emergent. If
Yes.
one of our citizens is out there
Yes.
and missing, I have no problem with that.
So for the emergency additional pay, if that's what you want to call it, the emergency tier 2,
Time and a
it'll,
half.
it'll just depend on what's going on, because it may not involve public works, it may not involve finance. I'm sorry, I'm not probably gonna go out and look for somebody, because I would probably be more of a hindrance than a help. That's, and I'm just being honest. I would be more of a hindrance than a help.
Where we would use you is, obviously, that night, I called you. and I said,
Absolutely.
"Get it
I'll
on
put it out on Facebook."
We were putting it on the
Right.
radio. I mean, we needed the whole community looking at
Right.
that point.
Correct, and it's, I'm salaried, the amount of hours that I don't clock in or whatever, I guess that doesn't matter to me, that's part of my salary, but, so the way we need to word this policy, and I almost agree. If it's an emergency call-in, I think the easiest way to say, if it's during the emergency hour of this to this, that the mayor has declared, it's time and a half. And I think that that's the easiest way to figure it, for all the departments, rather than, because 51, I mean, you could make it a flat rate on each person if you wanted to. Learning more about the labor laws and the payroll laws, I'm not in favor of these flat rates anymore. It just makes
Time and a
things a
half.
little more
Some
confusing
of
for
them
us.
are very problematic.
So I like the adding it on to their additional language. I think it makes it very simple to say time and a half if you're called in during an emergency situation. That's ultimately what your one contract says right now. If they're called in because of this, it's time and a half guaranteed.
And that
That
would, I
sounds good.
guess,
That
include
sounds
like
good.
in a weather event, so like, let's say it's been snowing all night, we get out there at 5, 6 a.m., by 10 a.m., Troy and I have communicated, we communicate with Jody, and we say, okay, it's our opinion, we need to declare, and then he does that, so then from 10 o'clock on until he shuts it down, we'd be looking at time and a half.
But then I'm also thinking of the example you just gave of it may not involve Public Works. So I don't want to limit it so that it says Public Works Director, Public Safety
Oh, no, no,
Commissioner.
no, I'm not talking that.
Yeah.
I just mean that's how it would work. I'm just using a snow event where it would involve public works. If it's not, then whatever.
We're at our
And that
1
tier
hour.
structure would go into effect, right? At that point too, the tier structure, I guess, yes.
We have started a very interesting discussion, and I think one that's
Andrea?
probably never been explored. One thing I try to say is that we never knee-jerk. I don't expect a decision in the next 2 weeks. We can discuss this in 2 weeks. And you guys have a lot to talk about. There's interesting conversations now that can be had. As a group, we're not going to get to fire, but it just says they're working on the budget.
Yeah, that's
So
what we're.
I will tell you that the information, the discussion today has been phenomenal, the best that I've ever heard from this committee. I hope you appreciate the data that's coming out, the discussion. This is what we get elected to do, is make those decisions, so.
I can remember when I first got on the fire department, 4th of July. with a fire call. 2 of us in town.
Oh, wow.
We're standing there waiting.
Wow.
Finally, one got, the other, he was an older guy. I'll take number 1, you take number 2. When we get out there, we'll have to figure it out.
Wow.
After that, we changed it.
Your policies,
That there had to be so many people within
10 minutes.
a time frame
Yeah.
to respond.
Yeah.
Because, okay, with just 2 of us out there,
Oh, man.
in a grass fire,
Oh, oh,
anything could have happened.
oh, man.
And the liabilities of it were,
Yeah.
we were just trying to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
But you talk about scary.
Yeah.
Got both trucks out there. I jumped on the other truck. We sprayed until we run out of water and went and got the other one and kept going. Finally, some farmers showed up to help.
Yeah.
There's some need to this
Yeah.
policy.
And that's a volunteer deal, but we still had to have
Yep.
a policy to kind of protect the ones that were.
That's right.
Interesting point, Ron.
Yep.
That was 2 years on the department.
You were in your second year. You were a rookie, you didn't really.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's what you call it, getting broke in real fast. That and right on the back of a truck. And that's compartment back there.